death, worship, and the Night Kingdom. Why are there Seelies in the Night Kingdom but not in Natlan whatsoever? These creatures that look like biblically accurate looking angels that can be found in Natlan's overworld, are they related to Columbina? Because the more I've been researching Natlan, its tribes, its history, the crazier this has all gotten to me. The lack of ley lines in Natlan, the entire function of the Night Kingdom. Natlan is by far, to me anyways, the most interesting and intriguing region so far. There's so many anomalies, and the Wayob, which is an entity within Natlan that serves as the ley lines for them and their people, which is why people from Natlan cannot leave their region. They are not connected to the ley lines in Irminsul like the rest of Teyvat, so they would be in potential danger if they left their home region. Now we know why they haven't left and why we've seen nobody else from Natlan in other regions. It's also incredibly interesting to me that people worship the Wayob. It's this unknown, very mysterious entity within Natlan and Natlan only. Wayob, the word itself coming from Mayan language, which states to be sleep or sleeping. That's actually important, we're going to get back to that. You've probably already noticed by exploring Natlan that each of the tribes has an obelisk, an obsidian black obelisk with their tribe logo on it. This is actually kind of interestingly the new way that they do Natlan's reputation system. It's a little bit different than every other region, which I find is a kind of nice touch. But these obelisks connect each tribe to the Wayob in their own way. Now what is the Wayob? It's an unknown mysterious entity that is worshipped by the 6 tribes of Natlan, and the Wayob is said to reside within the Night Kingdom. And the Wayob is capable of seeing the past and the future, and each tribe has its own connection with the Wayob, that they seek for protection, guidance, blessings, and that the tribe chiefs communicate with this Wayob in its will. The Wayob is also responsible for choosing trial members and their ancient inheritant names, like Kachina. Nobody knew why she was chosen, she was considered weak, but it's hard to question the will of the Wayob. We know the Abyss affected the Night Kingdom and the Wayob, and because the Wayob serves as Natlan's ley lines, obviously it would be detrimental to the nation and its people that the Abyss has corrupted and encroached on it. But also the souls of the dead reside within the Night Kingdom. It sort of acts as like the afterlife realm within Genshin or Natlan specifically. It's also the place where people go and they die in the tournament or the war. But as long as they win and ultimately are successful, they can be brought back to life. So dying in Natlan and people dying and coming back is a very common thing. It is very normal for somebody from Natlan to have died multiple times. Even Kinich had died himself in this war. So death is a very common thing. And it honestly just seems to me, the way that they talk about the Wayob, what it is, the concept of it, the purpose that it serves to the people of Natlan, it seems like a god that people worship. It's this greater power that everyone from Natlan for generations follows the wisdom, the guidance of this. So whatever the Wayob is important to Natlan. But I just find it interesting how they talk about it as being an intelligent deity that is all-knowing in some capacity. It should also be noted too that Natlan takes inspiration from Aztec culture. And there's 2 important reasons why their obelisks from each tribe are made from obsidian. Obsidian is also volcanic glass, which, a little side note, you can see a giant volcano in the background, which we'll probably get in like 4.2 or 4.3 or something. I'm really looking forward to it, but you can see this big ass volcano in the distance. Now, seeing as that A, there's a big ass volcano in Natlan, and B, we're in the nation of Pyro, it makes sense that they would use obsidian as a mineral for these obelisks that the tribes worship the Wayob. But it gets deeper than this. Obsidian was used as human sacrifice in Aztec death culture. They have an entire death culture within Aztec religion. Obsidian was used as self-sacrifice for religious punishment, commonly found within its death culture. So then there's another connection with the obsidian and the Aztec death culture, which Natlan is very heavily based off of. And the way the Wayob functions, it is sort of like the afterlife or death. And the Wayob chooses who competes in the tournament, who gets an ancient name, all of that. And death being a relatively common thing within Natlan. We also know Genshin likes to use a lot of real-world religions. I'm sure everyone's noticed by now. These enemies in the overworld, that if you didn't know this, they resemble a biblically accurate looking angel, which are unsettling to say the least. And if you want to take this one step further, there's a new enemy we're getting in 5.1 that also resembles an angel-like being. but a different kind, one of these kind. But they're an elite enemy, can be found in Natlan. So far they come in Hydro, Geo, and Dendro because those are the 3 tribes that we have. I'm sure we'll get more of these with different elements, corresponding with the other tribes we get once we can access their obelisk. And these entities that look like angels are manifestations of the Wayob that literally physically inhabit Natlan. They also have a funny gimmick where you can't use your bursts and they don't allow you to accumulate energy, which is kind of a nice little interesting detail. But there are different interpretations of each one corresponding with the different tribes. Now the in-game description of these is interesting. They're more or less worshipped manifestations of the Wayob and the Night Souls. An almost run-off belief, which is interesting because of their angel description, but also when you kill one of these, they just sort of vanish. It's sort of interesting and very obscure to me that they almost manifest in the physical world through a belief and worship of the Wayob. They are almost different versions or interpretations of that belief through the obelisks. They're very interesting and unsettling to say the least. Now, obviously, Columbina has biblical angel references. This has been known for years now, heavily connected with the Sealies, the ancient races, and death. It's also been heavily leaked for almost half a year now, and even to this day, that Columbina is at the very least very heavily linked with Natlan. Many leaks say she'll even be playable within the foreseeable future, with full descriptions of her kit and all that. That stuff you gotta take with a grain of salt, because leaks are all over the map, but it definitely seems very likely that she's in one way or another connected with Natlan. I'm not gonna say that she'll be playable or anything like that, but if we'll actually see her in the story in Natlan, it seems likely, since we usually get 2 Fatui Harbingers per region at the very least. At least it's been that way for a while now. So naturally, I think Columbina is connected to the Wayob in some way. Now let's break down how that could potentially be. I never thought in a million years that a video I made 2 years ago would be relevant as ever right now. I honestly thought this video would be obsolete by this point, but it's one of my favorite videos I've ever made, and it was one of the first videos that I ever uploaded on this channel. And essentially, to summarize the video very quickly, because some of the points are going to be very relevant for the next part of this video. The primordial one, Faunus, had 4 shining shades, which could be interpreted as angels. God and its angels. We know about the shade of time, Istaroth, who was present in both Enkanomiya and played a huge part in Mondstadt, and he was even worshipped in Mondstadt at one point, which obviously Venti's very heavily linked and connected with. And Istaroth being linked with wind, even being referred to as the god of time and wind. We know that in Fontaine, the shade of life was heavily linked with Ageria, the first Hydro Archon, and the shade of life being heavily linked with Hydro makes sense to me, because water is the element of life. Because wherever water is, life will start. That is the thing. Because no matter where water is, life will flourish. So 2 shades already making an impact on different regions. A lot of people speculate that the shade of space or void is the sustainer of heavenly principles. Whether that's true or not, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But all 4 artifacts represent the shades in the primordial one. The crown artifact obviously represents the primordial one, Paimon. The flower artifact representing life, which is why it's only ever an HP stat. The goblet representing space or void. The timepiece, do I even need to say? Then there's the feather artifact. It's a feather, and it only has an attack stat that resembles death. Now, if Mondstadt was heavily influenced by a shade, Istaroth, who's to say that Natlan can't be as well? We know that death is a big part of its culture through the obsidian obelisks, the Aztec culture that it's referenced and based from, the fact that people die here all the time and go to war, getting resurrected and dying again, constantly fighting a war, dying and fighting the abyss. And naturally, Columbina has a lot of links with death. She has feathers in the shape of angel wings on her design, her constellation the little dove in the shape of a heart. That's a bird with its eyes closed, crying. I mean, birds have feathers, come on. She is the 3rd Fatui Harbinger, constantly referenced to have a power rivaling that of the gods, but also said to be incredibly mysterious and ominous. And she's been constantly leaked and speculated to be linked with the Sealies. Now, I don't know how exactly this ties in together completely, but is it even a possibility with everything I've stated and what we can see from Natlan? The god or shade of death is playing a big part within Natlan's society. maybe even help safeguard and protect it. So naturally, I'm sure you guys can all see where I'm going with this. Is the Wayob in Natlan really the shade of death? Is that what they're really worshipping and what they're seeking guidance from? And is the god of death or the shade of death actually protecting Natlan in its own way because of its lack of ley lines? I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there's something here. The obelisks made from obsidian, the Aztec culture of death, which Natlan is heavily inspired from, the fact that people die here and go to war all the time. Death is also a very fitting concept and god to correspond with the pyro element and the nation of war. And the Night Kingdom, the land of the dead and the night souls, is the domain of the god or shade angel of death. And that it's either the shade itself or the will of the shade of death that chooses the ancient names and safeguards and stores those ancient names and memories because of their lack of ley lines. And that is why you can only find Seelies in the Night Kingdom, not in Natlan itself, being that the shades lived in the original world under the primordial one in the ancient civilizations. It also makes sense that the Night Kingdom would be the domain of death, if that's where you go when you die, and that's the shade of death's domain. It's also interesting how you access the Night Kingdom was through an ancient civilization from the old dragons. And if you didn't notice, there's a celestial nail here. So if the Shade of Time helped in Mondstadt and was part of its culture and its history, and the Shade of Life helped in Fontaine with Egeria and the Nation of Water, why couldn't the Shade of Death try to help Natlan in its own way? And this tournament and this cycle of death and reincarnation is part of its culture and how it thrives and survives, how it sustains itself, while the encroachment of the abyss is inevitable. Another crazy, interesting parallel that I found, and I don't know how much this actually connects to Genshin specifically, but biblically accurate looking angels play a big part specifically in the Book of Revelation, which is basically like the apocalypse, the end event, Judgment Day. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of Bible talk and religion. And then there's the rapture, which is said to be the end event, linked with the apocalypse, where all true Christians and believers would be resurrected and brought to heaven, while the Judgment Day and the sinners were punished. That's more or less the meat and potatoes of it. Doesn't that sound a lot like Natlan's culture? You get chosen by death, by the obelisks, to bear an ancient name. You go fight in the war, you die, you get reborn. It's part of their faith and culture. And the apocalypse is sort of like what Natlan's facing right now. Doomsday is coming with the abyss. The Pyro Archon said this herself, that in 500 years Natlan was going to be destroyed, and I think Natlan has like a year left, if that. So we're in full crisis mode. That just makes the biblically accurate looking angel monsters that much more relevant. But again, how does Columbina fit into all of this? So I'm going to speculate on that right now. I have a few ideas. Obviously, I feel that she's a manifestation of death itself. The shade of death, its greatest and most powerful manifestation. Strong enough to be one of the Fichui Harbingers and the top 3. That seems fairly obvious. But is she the shade of death manifested itself? I wouldn't necessarily go that far, because all manifestations of the Night Kingdom and the Wayob seem to take an angel form. So it definitely feels that she's a manifestation of some sort. Now what if in Natlan's past there was other tribes, and they were destroyed along with their obelisks? There's the tribe that Oraron and potentially the captain is from. There might have been a 7th tribe at one point. And if the Wayob manifestations that we see around the map are the beliefs and wills manifested into a physical form, is it possible that Columbina is manifested through the belief of a certain individual or certain tribe that may or may not exist anymore? What if the captain was an ancient hero of Natlan's past? Is one of the ancient name bearers? It would certainly suggest he's at the very least from Natlan, considering that in the trailer she suggests if he's going to actually participate and help them fight in the war. We know that the Traveler was not allowed to participate because we're not a native from Natlan, but she's also now trying to give us an ancient name and craft one. That's what's going to be happening in 5.1. So at the very least, the captain's gotta be from Natlan, right? Could he have been the one that manifested Columbina? And that's why they go hand in hand in Natlan, and makes them 2 of the top 3 Harbingers. Which tribe or which individual's beliefs manifested Columbina into the physical world through the obelisks, Natlan's Wayob, and potentially the Shade of Death, which explains her biblical and angel references? Remember how I told you that the word Wayob is Mayan for sleeping? Look at Columbina, she's always has her eyes closed. And her constellation is a dove that's crying and has its eyes closed. Maybe the crying is resembled to her being manifested through grief of something bad happening to one individual or its tribe, which in turn truly makes her the manifestation of death itself. Death in the Night Kingdom. Regardless if you agree on me with this video, agree on some points I've made, or disagree with me completely, it can't be denied that there's a lot of references and worship towards death. The afterlife, the Night Kingdom, being resurrected, it's all part of its culture in Natlan, and Natlan is isolated through the ley lines from all the other regions. And if we know for a fact that at least 2 other shades of the primordial one Faunus have interacted with different regions, who is to say that Natlan couldn't have been in the same boat? Especially that we know there's a celestial nail there, and that the primordial one and its shades tried to help humanity after that war in the heavens took place, when all the old civilizations were snuffed out, and Enkanomiya dropped into the watery abyss. Istaroth went there to help. Who is to say that the other shades did not try to help in their own way? And I feel that the Wayob is the shade of death, trying to protect Natlan, and this is just the system and customs that they do it. And either way, to me, even if it's not a shade playing a part here, you have to admit that the Wayob itself is a very strange and peculiar entity that people almost regard as like a deity or a god. It's a higher, all-knowing concept that people in Natlan base their whole lives and culture on. That is significant regardless of what it actually is. And even if it's not the shade of death, I still think Columbina is manifested from the Wayob in some capacity. It just makes the most sense to me. We haven't even discussed the weird circumstance in which Natlan chooses its Archon, a mortal that takes the Gnosis and takes the position of Pyro Archon. But is the Archon of Natlan even connected with Celestia and the Divine Throne? Is that why the Pyro Traveler can't resonate with Pyro, the Statue of the Seven that's in Natlan? Because in the Archon quest, she told us that the first Pyro Archon was a mortal man, most likely Shablanke, I hope I'm not butchering that name, but it was most likely him, and that first Pyro Archon, whoever that was, created the system of the pilgrimage, the night wars, and what fuels Natlan, what powers their flame and protects their nation. And she told us that the Night Kingdom essentially acts as the ley lines for Natlan. Now, did Natlan always not have ley lines? That seems unlikely. Why would they not have ley lines? If the ley lines connect the fates and memories and the history of everyone within Teyvat, connect with Irminsul, and Irminsul's rooted within Sumeru, and its avatar, the Dendro Archon, why would Natlan not have ley lines? I mean, if anything, Inazuma's the furthest away, and we know they have strong ley line connections. What if the ley lines were destroyed in Natlan deliberately? The first Pyro Archon and the Wayob, aka maybe the Shade of Death. What if they were destroyed to sever their connections with Irminsul, Celestia, the rules of the heavenly principles? This would explain, one, how a mortal man became the Archon, but yet isn't connected to Celestia and the Divine Throne. How Natlan created its own system that functions as ley lines. And again, could be the Shade of Death helping safeguard this nation and keeping them isolated from everywhere else. Which in turn is why people from Natlan can't leave their home nation and homeland. And the Night Kingdom realm established for this purpose and function, because remember, the Shade of Life created Egeria after the Hydro Sovereign was removed from their authority and power over the Primordial Sea, and Egeria was created to be the new heart of the sea. So in its own weird way, it would make kind of a lot of sense when you know the connection with the Primordial One and its shades with humanity. Humanity was their greatest accomplishment, and we know that Egeria tried to give humanity to her Oceanids and the people of Fontaine, which the prophecy, Focalor had to trick the heavenly principles. I think there was a deal or a pact between the first Pyro Archon, who was just a mortal man, and the Shade of Death. The first mortal man was gifted this authority by the Shade, and by destroying the ley lines and severing that connection through Celestia and the heavenly principles' rules, this allowed a mere mortal to take the Gnosis and the authority. But because that connection is severed, you cannot claim the divine seat, which in turn means that the traveler cannot resonate with Pyro. And now they have the Night Kingdom, and the Primordial Flame, which requires people from Natlan to participate in this pilgrimage and this system, fight in the night wars, and fuel the sacred flame through death and resurrection. War and death being the source of Natlan's greatest power. And now, our current Pyro Archon also made a deal with the Wayob and possibly death itself. She had to die in order to be reborn 500 years later to ultimately protect Natlan from its demise. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it almost seems unanimous that, similarly to how Istaroth is connected to Venti, death seems to be connected to all the Pyro Archons. And the fact that the Pyro Archon can be mere mortals passing down this title must be heavily linked with the lack of ley lines, otherwise I don't know how they would get away with this. I don't see Celestia allowing this, considering Egeria created humans out of Oceanids and was punished with a prophecy. It's also been confirmed many times in Genshin Impact that gods get power, especially Archons, through belief. That is why a lot of people believe that Venti's much stronger than the game lets on, because they have an entire church, statues, and people within Mons that are passionate about their Archon, the city and nation of freedom. Belief powers gods, and this entire function of Natlan is a genius creation by the first Pyro Archon and Death itself, the Night Kingdom, to make true believers out of everyone within Natlan. And the Pyro Archon herself told us that the reason she hasn't told everyone about this demise that's coming and trying to awaken the 6 heroes other than a select few people she can trust. She doesn't want everyone's belief to waver. This is what fuels Natlan and the Sacred Flame. It would be detrimental if people knew the truth, because if their belief wavers, that might spell the end for Natlan. We still don't know about the Pyro Sovereign. This could have all been orchestrated because the lack of a Pyro Sovereign, and maybe similar to the Hydro Sovereign. Once the Pyro Sovereign was removed from its authority, the mortal man that became the first Archon created these new rules for Natlan, and severing their connections to Irminsul and the ley lines allowed them to actually do this without being heavily punished by Celestia. And as for Columbina, similarly to these other manifestations that look like angels within Natlan, she might be the most powerful belief of death and the Night Kingdom itself. A tribe that might still exist, maybe a tribe that was destroyed throughout the many years of Natlan's history, or the Fatui Harbingers themselves. And perhaps, maybe she's even the manifestation of the Shade of Death. Maybe that's the physical form that the Shade of Death can take into the physical world. But I'm going to wrap the video up there. I do want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think I'm onto something? Do you think I'm out to lunch? Or do you think there's some half-truths maybe? I'm not quite connecting the dots right, but there's something here. Whether you agree with me or not though, it cannot be denied that Natlan, the Pyro Archon are all linked with death in a very meaningful way. Through each tribe, their obelisks, the way the Wayob functions, and the way people die and are resurrected. As for the lack of ley lines and the why we don't have a Pyro Traveler, that's going to be revealed to us within time, so we won't have to wait too long to find out. But these are just some ideas that I had, and the Shade of Death is the last shade that we really have to explore within Genshin so far. And this would be the perfect circumstance to do it. It makes so much sense, Natlan and everything themed around it. And if Columbina is a manifestation of the Wayob, whose manifestation and beliefs do you think she manifested from? Somebody from Natlan, one of the tribes that was destroyed, the captain himself, maybe Piero, somebody we haven't met yet, or death itself? But let me know your thoughts in the comments. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.